Good morning, everyone. I'm just setting up. Okay, let's see now. Last week we were they were running with a 7.5 minute delay on the video, which seemed excessive to me, but nonetheless, that's what it was. And so uh, I apologize for that. You can see me responding on the YouTube chat in real time, but my video may be coming to you quite a bit after I said anything. Okay. So let's see what I got here. All right. So today, as usual, we'll be reading from Jung's Red Book for Our Time, Searching for Soul Under Postmodern Conditions, edited by Mary Stein and Thomas Arst. This is volume 12, or I'm sorry, volume 4 of our 5-volume series. And so I hope you enjoyed today's reading. The Red Book and Our Contemporary Crises, Active Imagination, Mass Migration, and Climate Change by Robert M. Mercurio. Now, I guess I should look in the back and see what it says about Robert M. Mercurio. So I'm going to do that and read that to you first. Okay, so Robert M. Mercurio completed degrees in philosophy and on management before pursuing graduate studies in theology at the Gregorian University, Rome. He subsequently enrolled in the C.G. Jung Institute, Kuznach, Zurich, where he received his diploma in analytical psychology. His diploma thesis on the meaning of religious symbols in Etruscan culture sparked an interest in the interface between religious sentiment and psychology, a topic he continues to write and lecture on, together with fairy tale interpretation and alchemy. He has lectured at ISAP in Zurich, at the Guild for Pastoral Psychology in Oxford, and in a number of training courses for Jungian therapists, both in Italy and abroad. He is currently president of ARPA, Association per la Recherche in Psychologia Analytica, Italy. That's it. Okay. So Mr. Mercurio seems to be an Italian, but his essay is in English. So carrying on. And I hope everybody is here and comfortable. Okay, the lengthy interview of Suzanne Wagner holds with Mary Louise von France in the film A Matter of Heart contains some particularly moving moments. There are discussions of theological questions, memories of personal experiences, and humorous incidents. But then von Franz zeroes in on the question of the destruction we risk havocing on our planet and on ourselves. I keep getting messages up on my screen. I apologize for that. Okay. She laments the fact that out of what she calls sheer shadow stupidity, we could undo the wonderful results of countless millennia of evolution and destroy the beauty of our world. She then mentions a series of visions Jung is said to have had shortly before his death, in which large expanses of the earth, but not all of it, lie in a state of total desolation. The camera then zooms in for a close-up of her clenched fists as she repeats that we must not fantasize about abandoning the planet, a motif found in much science fiction, but should stand up for it and stand up to God and tell him that it must not happen. Her source of inspiration in this is, as she admits, Jung's answer to Job. Okay. In the same film, Dieter Baumann emphasizes how Jung was always interested in and concerned about what was happening in the world. The introversion he lived in his tower at Bollingen, behind me here, for example, was not a form of escape, but rather a search for a form of philosophical distance and objectivity, which allowed him to maintain the right perspective on inner and outer events. Likewise, the intense imaginative encounters, thanks to which Jung worked his way through his critical phase of life and discovered new paths of entry into the unconscious, were not a merely personal affair. In Liber Primus, we read, quote, since men do not know what the conflict occurred, that the conflict in, I'm going to start that again in a moment. Sorry. Since men do not know what the conflict, since men, oh boy, this is not doing well today. Sorry about that, folks, but I've just, I'm on my Christmas break from my school, and I haven't caught up on my rest as yet. Since men do not know that the conflict occurs inside themselves, they go mad, and one lays the blame on the other. If one half of mankind is at fault, then every man is half at fault. But he does not see the conflict in his own soul, which is, however, the source of the outer disaster. Yeah. So we are the source of our own outer disaster. Absolutely. In his memoirs, Jung reminds us that after his confrontation with the unconscious, quote, I cease to belong to myself alone, cease to have the right to do so, unquote. Edward Edinger, in his The Creation of Consciousness, sees Jung as the epical man who ushers in a new phase of history with a new way of overcoming the dilemma of mythlessness. The myth we need to embrace is the myth of the intimate connection and collaboration of consciousness and the unconscious, or the need that each has for the other. The myth of a real mysterium conjunctionis. We see this happening right before our eyes in the Red Book, where Jung's encounters are encounters of his individuality with the soul of all of humanity, and of humanity itself with the world of the archetypes. As we know, the only parts of his Red Book, as we know, the early parts of his Red Book were written under the lingering influence of the intense visions of destruction Jung had in 1913. The turmoil of the world of collective reality and his own inner turmoil were aspects of the same critical psychic drama. The great contribution Jung made and the legacy he left us in and through his Red Book is what we might call the art of active imagination. It is indeed amazing that in 1916, in the midst of such turbulent psychic times, he managed to author his cogent and exhaustive text on this art, the transcendent function. As Jeffrey C. Miller has demonstrated, despite a long series of syntactical changes and the reworking of a number of sentences, the original text remained substantially unchanged when it finally went to press in 1958. It is Jung's carefully constructed and illustrated reflection on what he himself had been doing and would continue to do for some years to come. He explains how his method is the only way in which consciousness can actually participate in that symbolic mediation between opposites that he called the transcendent function. And he seems to have recognized that what he was doing in his imaginative encounters was fundamental to the dilemma of modern man. Jung knew full well then that the coming Aquarian age would require imaginative courage he himself was mustering and utilizing in his dealings with unconscious figures. Okay, sorry, folks. As I said, I'm a little tired today, and I'm putting myself to sleep. Good morning, Sherry. Nice to see you. At least somebody's come to listen. Uh, and otherwise, it's just a conversation between Art and me. Mm. And I am sleepy, I have to admit. Uh, okay. All right. Carrying on. Let's see. Microcosm and macrocosm. By the way, in my school, in the beginning of next semester, which begins January 5th, I will be reading the narrative of Frederick Douglass, an American slave, which was first published between 1838 and 1845. And it's quite an impressive piece of work for a man who was a slave and not given the opportunity to even learn to read until he was well along in his life. And so in theory, I'm going to publish the reading here, but I probably will not do that until after I've finished it. Sure, you haven't slept in 2 days. Boy, something is after us, I think. Oh, goodness. Okay. I have slept, but last night I slept okay. Night before last, not at all. And I need to use this 2 weeks during our Christmas vacation to catch up on my rest. And by the way, our advanced reading group, which normally meets on Wednesday, will be meeting tomorrow, Monday, because Wednesdays, the next 2 weeks, falls on Christmas Eve and New Year's Eve. And so for the next 2 weeks, the advanced reading group will be meeting on Mondays at the usual time. Okay, microcosm and macrocosm. In a somewhat surprising passage found in volume 16 of his collected works, The Practice of Psychotherapy, Jung reminds us that even if the specific individual involved in psychological work may appear to be insignificant, the beneficial work results of the work are not limited to the individual and to his or her own interiority. What one does, in effect, Jung tells us, is to add one small grain of sand to the cause of the soul of humanity, which hangs in the balance. Hence, even the most seemingly modest psychological result is a sort of opus magnum that benefits us all. Very interesting idea to say that an individual analysis benefits society as a whole, and I do think that that's true, and therefore I'm reading the Frederick Douglass narrative. And I always remember what Margaret Mead said. Remember that um, a few people can change the world because it's the only thing that ever has changed the world. Okay. Jung's reference to a seemingly insignificant individual strikes us as odd. Is this the same Jung who stressed so often the absolute value of the individual? Is it the same Jung who wrote that humanity consists only of individuals? Is it the same Jung who is said to have repeatedly affirmed that the only thing that could protect us from a Third World War was an adequate number of individuals able to hold within themselves the tension of the opposites? What on earth might an insignificant individual actually be? What emerges from this apparent contradiction is the quintessential symbolic Jung. Both the single specific individual and the soul of humanity are united in the symbol. The anthropos is the intimate essence of each one of us, but also the transcendent collective reality that ties us to each other, to earthly elements and to the sky and to our experience of transcendence. The ultimate goal and the backdrop of our human happenings are the collective transcendent dimension of reality, but the transcendent risks vaporizing into mere fluff, but the transcendent risks vaporizing into mere fluff if it is not somehow incarnated in individuals. Okay. Any comments so far? Okay, moving on. The Chinese sage Chuang Tzu says that the pivotal point of Tao corresponds to a state in which the ego and the non-ego are no longer in opposition to each other. This is the symbolic dimension Jung is working with and on in his imaginative experiences. That hollow nothing that he feels, that hollow nothing that he feels his ego identity to be to be goes beyond itself and, interacting with a host of archetypal figures, forges a new symbolic reality. Chuang Tzu reminds us that Tao is clouded when we fix our gaze only on the small single element of existence. Individuals in their specificity must necessarily be seen in the light of the universal reality they incarnate, which while transcendence will be meaningful and livable to the career that sorry, I'm putting myself out, as I said. Okay. So when I have little spells like that, I'm literally hypnotizing myself. And it takes me a minute or two to pull myself out of it. It's usually better if one of you chooses to join me to keep pushing me along on this side, on the Zoom side. Zhang Su reminds us that Tao is clouded when we fix our gaze only on the small single elements of existence. Individuals and their specificity must necessarily be seen in the light of the universal reality they incarnate, while transcendence will be meaningful and livable to the extent that it finds its agent in the individual, since the two are communicating vessels. It is imagination that creates the bond between persons. The reasonable sense of oneself that the thinking ego is is brought face to face with the meaning of the world at large, which insofar as it is fruit of the imagination, lives in and through others. The ancient idea of the anthropos extends the network we as humans live in to include animals, vegetation, earth and sky, and even ignorant matter. The original cosmic man, present in so many mythologies, is made of all these things. And his dismemberment endows its existence with the conscious manifestation of them. The anthropos is, in von Franz's words, a sort of preconscious collective soul that is not limited to our humanity. Sorry, my voice is going. What shall we talk about? Somebody to come wake me up here. Okay. Jung's careful distinctions between the dynamic of the feeling-toned complex on the one hand and the archetypal reality at the heart and core of the complex on the other hand illustrate a similar symbolic approach. The suffering of the individual and his or her difficulties in reaching even the most elementary forms of adaptation are naturally our first priority as psychotherapists. Ours is a helping profession, a profession of care and healing, and yet the care and healing that start with the individuals in our consulting room are not exclusively for them. It becomes a form of healing that touches the unconscious and its conflicts. In her book on active imagination, Barbara Hanna remarks that our souls are little more than the battlefield for these conflicts in the unconscious unless we become conscious of what is happening and somewhat participate. And in his 1925 in his 1925 seminars, Jung tells us he had discovered that the unconscious was working on, I'll look out for a minute. And in his 1925 seminars, Jung tells us he had discovered that the unconscious was working at an elaboration of certain enormous collective fantasies. Our individuality touches the collective, and the collective in turn touches our individuality. Jung never defines his psychology as archetypal, yet it is, but only in part. Nor does he define it as personal or individual because the description would be equally partial. The Red Book is an amazing example of the way both approaches proceed and intervene in the general, in the symbolic dimension. Okay, I'm going to read that again. Nor does he define it as a personal or individual, because this description would be equally partial. The Red Book is an amazing example of the way both approaches proceed and intertwine in the symbolic dimension, and the key adjective symbolic emerges as the only faithful and accurate description of Jung's approach to psychological life and work. The man, the individual Jung, is there. He gags as he tries to swallow a small piece of the dead girl's liver, just as the girl's mother and his soul had asked him to. He shivers and shakes out of fear and is repulsed by the ugliness of certain scenes he encounters. And yet, what he is doing goes beyond his own personal fate. Quote, as a man, you as a man, you are as a man, you are part of mankind, and therefore you have a share in the whole of mankind, as if you were the whole of mankind. Okay. Whew. Oh, this is not going well to get today. Sure. Oh my God. It's just, whew. Um, my brain has been getting itself around what was happening to Frederick Douglass during his youth and how he interacted with slave owners. And having read that this morning, and then this is just a little more than I can handle at the moment. Uh, Therese says, I go to nature. Yes, this is nature for sure. You're seeing it. And let's see how I can do this. Okay, let me give it a try. Um, I will try one more section of this, which is going to be several pages long. And yeah, six pages. I will do my best to get through 6 pages, but considering I have to do it alone here, it's a little bit uh, questionable. Okay, the two are contemporary crises. The two most dramatic and pressing crises we as a civilization are currently facing, or not facing, are the rapidly changing climatic conditions around the globe and the phenomenon of the large-scale migration of peoples. These are by no means recent phenomena. Regarding migration, M.H. Fisher writes that we are all descendants of migrants. In contrast with the past, however, migration is now considered an international and cross-cultural phenomenon, and its dimensions have grown disproportionately due to changes in climatic conditions, abject poverty, famine and drought, political persecution, and violations of basic human rights. Climate change has become a pressing issue due to the steadily rising rate of the modifications we are all beginning to experience firsthand. Both of these critical questions bring the ego face to face with its own inability to break into the past and find original solutions. They constitute a testing ground for the ego's they constitute a testing ground for the ego's ability to look reality squarely in the face, recognize the dangers it holds, and go beyond stiff and rigid ego-oriented positions as we are then start that sentence again. They constitute a testing ground for the ego's ability to look reality squarely in the face, recognize the danger it holds, and go beyond stiff and rigid ego-oriented positions as we seek solutions. And yet, even a quick and cursory inventory of our collective reactions would reveal the one-sidedness and rigidity of the ego that Jung warned us of so many times. What's more, technological and scientific advances have contributed to the lamentable state of inflation that can inflation that ego consciousness wallows in. The American This you, in my dream here, I see somebody else doing the work, but I'm not able to do it myself. Oh my God. Okay, I'm going to start that page again. I'm on page 18, and I'm reading from Jung's Red Book for Our Time, Searching for Soul Under Postmodern Conditions, Volume 4, page 18. What's more, technological and scientific advances have contributed to the lamentable state of inflation that ego consciousness wallows in. The Psychology and Alchemy, Jung wrote, in Psychology and Alchemy, Jung wrote, quote, an inflated consciousness is always egocentric and conscious of nothing but its own existence. It is incapable of learning from the past, incapable of understanding contemporary events, and incapable of drawing right conclusions about the future. It is it is hypnotized by itself and therefore cannot be argued with. It inevitably dooms itself to calamities that must strike it dead. Okay. um, all right. Thank you, everyone, for being here. The first and most noteworthy reaction to the two critical situations mentioned previously is total denial. Climate change does not exist, many say. And if it does, it is not as severe as the majority of mainstream scientists and climatologists seem to think. And in uncertain terms, okay, good morning. The first and most noteworthy reaction to and the two critical situations mentioned previously is total denial. Climate change does not exist, many say, or if it does, it is not as severe as the majority of mainstream scientists and climatologists seem to think. And in any case, they add it is not caused by human intervention or activity. Noam Chomsky has carefully studied and monitored this sort of reaction, which he sees as arising from the blinding effect of doctrinaire ideologies. The suffering that climatic change wreaks on the already less fortunate portions of humanity uh, meets with the sort of same evil. The ever-present hysterical reactions of both political leaders and the average man or woman, on the other hand, tend to systematically inflate and exaggerate the problems in terms of numbers and responsibilities. Donald Trump has repeatedly put the blame for climate change, when he is not totally denying it, squarely on poor developing countries, and has created a paranoid narrative that underscores how other nations, especially China, are using the Paris climate agreements to cheat on already sadly duped America out of much of its wealth. Right-wing politicians around the globe have subscribed to the same tactic that Trump has presented and represented ad nauseum. A similar sort of rhetoric is used to ignore and deny rather than to deal with the problem of the migration of individuals. A A similar sort of rhetoric is used to ignore and deny rather than to deal with the problem of the migration of individuals. A hysterical and paranoid weave of terroristic images depicting waves of criminals seeping into the fabric of American life and destroying our European Christian heritage is brought to bear on collective consciousness, which is, in Jung's words, hyper hypertrophied and hybristic, and in most cases lacks the vision and the tools needed for serious critical reflection. Okay. Whew. Just a second. I want to see how long this essay is going to be here. Okay. Maybe I can struggle through it with some some sensitivity from my audience who um, is having to wait while I hypnotize myself multiple times. So Cherie says, Noam Chomsky, Manufacturing Intellect, who co-authored that books with him? I do not know. Yeah, okay. Okay, in psychology and religion, sorry. In psychology and religion, Jung points out that the greater the number of projections at work, the more consciousness ceases to be what it ought to be, namely an instrument of discrimination. It risks, in Jung's words, becoming a mere heap of emotions. The projections surrounding migration and climate change are rife with the identification of the causes, and even the simple definition of these problems are branded as a favorite pastime of the elite, or indeed as a hypocritical lack of patriotism. Migrants are seen as unproductive burden on society, and those willing to welcome them as weaklings with no desire to protect and strengthen their institutions. That seemingly favorite game and activity of the unconscious, projection, paints a dismal picture of the situation that might otherwise arouse feelings of sensitivity and solidarity. Okay, so let's see if I can put my mind around that. Okay, so what he's saying is that we project things on migrants, and um, as a result, we don't deal with the migrant situation with appropriate sensitivity. And I have a psychology friend um, who who believes that the solution to migration is to drop bags of money on the countries that are uh, in the most trouble rather than dropping bombs. And there's it makes good sense in some ways. Okay, we live in the midst of what many commentators are calling apocalypse fatigue. Aside from the hysterical and paranoid sides of this phenomenon, we need to recognize the depressive side as well. The belief that we are now in so deep that nothing can be done is rampant. Our planet is doomed to burst into flames any day now, and we are already in the throes of a virtual invasion of immigrants from abroad. There is no sense in doing anything, for alas, all is lost. We are paralyzed and petrified like so many unwary visitors to Medusa, which Edward Edinger brilliantly explained as the tragic view of life and existence. It would seem, as the great Italian anthropologist Ernesto de Martino wrote, that apocalyptics uh, refuse to really look at the very world they continue to destroy. Okay, yeah, no kidding. Sherry says Edward Bernays has the nephew was the nephew of Sigmund Freud twice, I believe. Okay. Hmm. Okay. Struggling along, but still doing it. The reactions listed above, from projection to hysteria and repression, from panic to depression, from paranoia to outright denial, could easily be found in any textbook uh, on defense mechanisms. And a good number of them would be listed in the chapter titled Archaic Defenses. Why do these situations arouse in us as sorry. I gotta look back here because all right. The reactions listed above, from projection to hysteria and repression, from panic to depression, from paranoia to outright denial, could easily be found in any textbook on defense mechanisms, and a good number of them would be listed in the chapter titled Archaic Defenses. Why do these situations arouse in us reactions of this kind? Why do we deny, exaggerate, despair, and blame instead of facing their critical issues of modern life in a reflective and creative way? We seem to be bumping into an array of psychic dynamics that parallel what happened to Jung in the Red Book. Along his road, lurk invisible robbers and assassins and shooters of poisoned darts. He tells us he carried the murders and war inside itself in him. His interior is a volcano that pushes out the fiery molten mass of the unformed and the undifferentiated. Jung does not, however, just sit on, does not, Jung does not, however, just sit and let things happen. In his long imaginative encounters, he resists, reacts, interrogates, insists, questions, and never stops trying to set up relationships. His consciousness brings to bear on the world of the unconscious the one thing it can truly offer: discrimination, the desire and the attempts to clarify and not simply to submit make all the difference. He tells us that he sinks down into the symbols, and this allows the symbols to change him. I have interpreted these images as best I can with poor words. This is indeed the decisive step. If any, if any of you are psychotherapists or analysts, uh, you are welcome to come along and tell me about my problem with getting hypnotized by this work. Uh, but I, but I can easily see that one of the reasons it hasn't become more popular is that it just is too much for the human psyche to deal with it at the moment. And even I, who have been working with it for 35 years, just find it overwhelming sometimes. Let's see. Okay, here's some interesting questions from Cherie. Um, what were the three books that Frederick Douglass and Abraham Lincoln had in common that they read? First is the Bible, of course, and then uh, two, the Orator. I don't know what the origin of the Orator is, Cherie, so you could add that. And who was the founding father who said we must dismiss the logos? Interesting question. I don't know. And I'd love to hear. Okay, making progress. So what you're seeing on your screen as I'm doing this is that I am sinking down into the symbols which he's describing. He tells us that he sinks down into the symbols, and this allows the symbols to change him. I've interpreted these images as best I can with poor words. This is indeed the decisive step. The method of active imagination that Jung not only explains in his essay, The Transcendent Function, and in his 1929 commentary on The Secret of the Golden Flower, but actually lives and experiences as shown in the Red Book, is what takes us beyond an attitude of projection. It helps us to gather the parts of ourselves that live outside and to listen to who or what they are and what they want. It creates a situation in which the ego no longer assigns stock meanings to emerging images. Rather, the ego respectfully listens as the images explain themselves and show the role they play. The role they play in the individuation process of the individual person and of the world. If done properly, it is an exercise in extreme truthfulness. Nothing can be explained, nothing can be explained away through the nothing can be explained away through the trickery of ego reasoning, which von Franz once defined as narcissistic self-indulgence. Okay. Okay, well, as everyone who's watching this can see, I certainly cannot explain things away through ego reasoning because I'm just uh, dropping into a hypnotic state, uh, very definitely. Okay, trying to read on. On the collective plane, active imagination is of fundamental importance in dealing with the shadow. In speaking about this aspect of Jung's vision of psychological work, Alfred Ribby writes, quote, "Do I improve the world by interpreting my poor devils? Yes, because them of the evil I believe them of the evil I have constantly projected. I take on myself that portion of evil, perhaps an infinitesimal fraction of the evil of the world. That belongs to me. The evil no longer goes about unnoticed as a free roving demon causing harm hither and yon, for it has been exercised into my psyche." And further in this text, adds, "A person who has integrated evil becomes a kind of focal point. Evil cannot take effect in his environment. This casts an influence that goes far beyond the person in question." Hmm. Yeah. Sure, says the Colombian oratory. Okay, thank you. Yeah, I found this interesting. Um, this interesting synchronicity about reading the um, Frederick Douglass's narrative, because in it is included his speech, "What to the Black Man is the 4th of July," which he gave on the 5th of July, 1852, at uh, Corinthian Hall. Now, the reason that's an interesting synchronicity is the Corinthian Hall it burned down in 1898, but it was on the site of what today is Midtown Plaza and Midtown Tower in Rochester, New York. And that's significant because the superintendent of schools of my county, um, Mark Bedell, and I both had interactions with that building. In my case, I practiced law in Midtown Tower from 1974 to 1976. and and I'm familiar with the energy that exists at that building, which now I understand it. Okay, so the Columbian Oratory. So that's two books. What is the third book? Um, it says, who is Alfredo Rodriguez and why did Pam Bondi say there was no client list? God, good question. Uh, talking about the people that are running our government right now. Okay, we need to be clear. Ribby is not simply referring to the fact that such a person might be a good example others could follow. He is referring to the fact that the sort of relationship that active imagination creates between consciousness and the world of the collective unconscious actually modifies the nature of both of these realities and thus influences the world by modifying the background of our everyday reality and calming the sea our conscious world floats upon. The unconscious is, as Jung reminds us in the psychology of the transference, the matrix of the human mind and of all its inventions. Wonderful and ingenious as this other side of the unconscious is, it can be most dangerously deceptive on account of its numinous nature. Yeah, definitely. Okay. Um, What is recounted in the Red Book shows us just how trying such a task can be. It is immense, and yet, as Jung's soul reminds him, the gods need a human mediator and rescuer. The gods need precisely your human wits. The participation of consciousness becomes fundamental for the resolution of those fantasies that the unconscious is working out in itself, for man is now a limb that even the gods cannot do without. Interesting. Okay, reading on. In her essay on active imagination, Marie-Louise von France points out that the practice of active imagination is a way of influencing the unconscious, of actually modifying its state and its dynamics. Okay. It is it if, as we have seen, the parts of our psyches that emerge in the face of crises like climate change and immigration are rigid, defensive, and prone to flight and denial, surely we can ask the unconscious. Sorry. Aesop's fables, oral tales of slaves, classical antiquity. Uh-huh. Okay, well, that makes sense. Okay, I have to figure out where to pick this up again because, as I say, I'm hypnotizing myself as I go, so it's quite the challenge. If, as we have seen, the parts of our psyches that emerge in the face of crises like climatic change and immigration are rigid, defensive, and prone to flight and denial, surely we can ask the unconscious for more. We can ask the unconscious to provide us with instruments and tools that will sharpen our sensitivities and awaken our sense of empathy. We can follow the example of Job, as von Franz encourages us to, and insist on saying that the resources we are tapping into are just not good enough, and they represent the poorest, weakest, and strongest, stingiest parts. The stingiest parts of our humanity. And our humanity is capable of more if we work with the gods and the gods with us. If the anthropos is engaged, we can find the resources we need to survive and invert the tendency toward catastrophe we are currently acting out. The unconscious shows us a face that is faithful reflection of the face our consciousness turns toward it. It follows then that we need to turn to the unconscious, fully aware of our need to feel ourselves sustained by more than what the ego has to offer. Our dedicated, humble attention to the unconscious might bring to the fore resources that do not entail fright, flight, denial, and projection. We need Sherry says there were 3 meetings between Abraham Lincoln and Frederick Douglass. What happened? I do not know. I haven't read I am about 40% into the book, so I might come back with something about that. We might be able to feel the flow of openness, balance, concern, serious dedication, problem solving, and even empathy. Jonathan Safran Foer's, and this is the name of a essay, We Are the Weather, Saving the Planet Begins at Breakfast, contains a very moving, imaginative passage that the author titles Dispute with the Soul. He takes his lead, as he explains, from the well-known ancient Egyptian text, Dispute with the Soul of One Who is Tired of Life, which he summarizes as a person's efforts to persuade his soul to consent to suicide. While Foer's text does not seem to be an example of active imagination sensu stricto in the strict sense, it is a sincere attempt to listen to the voice of the speaker's own inner contradictions and of the complexities of his work toward the crisis of climate change. Four's ego repeats that he is hopeful, and the soul reminds him he is ignoring his rage and despair. The soul encourages him to develop his ideas, to express things more effectively, and to move forward with ideas that are are and that they are still ordered. The soul encourages him to develop his ideas, to express things more effectively, and to move forward with ideas that are still in embryonic form. As you can see, that's important because they're knocking my socks off. It does not accept the ego's complacency and the comfortable feeling that it has said or done enough. At one point, she tells For's ego, your mind, your heart, they are made in such a way that they cannot accept what I say. And she chides the ego, saying, it's wrong to assume that the soul is what we appeal to with momentous questions in the momentous moments. It is the soul that asks the questions, not answers them. What For is doing is interrogating his own inner life, asking to animate itself and speak to him, challenge him, and ultimately nourish him. The Red Book warns us that hunger makes the soul into a beast that devours the unbearable and is poisoned by it. My friends, it is wise to nourish the soul, otherwise, you will breed dragons and devils in your heart. That's a quote from Jung. What For and Jung have in common is the realization that our efforts to face the challenges of life and of the planet need to be rooted first and foremost in a relationship with our inner life, with the unconscious, as it resonates with both our personal repressed, forgotten, and neglected parts, and with the archetypal voices of the life. Of the life of humanity itself. Jung's engagement is more intense, more truthful, more psychologically real than For's, which is at once a literary trope and an attempt to hear the voices of his own inner world. Yet it is without a doubt a move in the right direction. We'll see how much is left. Okay, just 2 pages, and it's called Unus Mundus, which means one world. And I do want to read that. I am going to take a short bio break, excuse me, myself, and I will return anon. I apologize for that, but I have no help here on this side of this discussion. So please feel free to continue to discuss on the YouTube channel. All right, thank you all for sticking with me. Whew. I don't know, is this narcolepsy that you're saying? It could be, I don't know. So it's something I interpret it as hypnosis when it happens. But okay, Sherry says the first meeting of Douglas sought out Lincoln was August 10th, 1863, and lasted 45 minutes. Frederick came out awed by Lincoln. My apologies. Two other books, Shakespeare and Yeoman Farmers. Lord Byron poems, Gutenberg, Lloyd. No, I have trusted Noam Chomsky. I have all the of Professor Michael Parenti's starting in the 80s until he passed, I believe in 2010. What is Professor Michael what a Professor Michael Parenti was, history and political science. There was a debate between Professor Michael Parenti and Noam Chomsky. Uh, Michael Parenti ate his lunch. Okay. And what university was Parenti at? I'm just curious. Um, but thank you for keeping the discussion going, Sheree. Okay, now then, going back. All right, so there's only two more pages. One is called Unus Mundus, and the other is called The Ethical Challenge. So I will at least get through these two pages, uh, come what may, today. All right, so Unus Mundus, and I apologize to Professor Mercatio, I believe it is, Mercurio, for making a hash of reading his essay. And you know, since he refers to Mercurio, his name Mercurio suggests Mercury or um, whatever the Greek name was. I have to think about it. Okay, Unus Mundus. We're reminded by various authors and by our own personal experiences that intense encounters with the unconscious through active imagination are often accompanied by synchronistic events. You think? Somehow, that mysterious dimension where the distance and separation between inner and outer and between matter and spirit seem to move closer, and what Jung called the transgressive aspect of the archetype makes itself felt in the moment of ultimate unity. Maybe we're experiencing that right now in this discussion. Barbara Hanna writes, the greatest use of active imagination is to put us, like the rainmaker, into harmony with the Tao so that the right things may happen around us instead of the wrong. There is nothing magical about this, nor is it a form of manipulation. Any sort of relationship that is one-sided, ego-centered, unbalanced, and disordered tends to create chaos in and all around itself. Where do we know that? A more balanced dialogical and serious relationship with the fundamental base of our existence will obviously contribute to the creation of harmony. And the harmony, both on an individual and on a collective level, will bring us into harmony with resources that help in enhancing our human lives on this planet. One day, asserts Lawrence Vanderpost, experts will reread history and discover that the rise and fall of great civilizations were in direct relationship to the sort of contact and dialogue those civilizations had with the forces of nature and of the collective unconscious. Even the most noble and generous spirits risk losing contact with the primordial forces. Through inflation, they risk believing that they control these forces, and then those spirits plummet mercilessly into confusion and despair. Um, okay, well, it's very obvious from this discussion today that I do not control these spirits. Okay, and then here's a quote. History um, History re-examined in terms of this great hypothesis will show precisely how not the uncertainties of physical environment and external disaster, but the inadequacy of humans' conscious relationship with their collective unconscious and their failure constantly to renew, deepen, and widen them were the real causes of decline and fall. And so you can see directly in me, unquote, by the way, but you can see directly in me as I'm trying to read about these things. Um, they are almost overwhelming to me. And in some moments, they certainly are overwhelming to me. Um, and And so, and I've been studying Jungian psychology for 35 years, so the average layman has very little chance, I think. And and I had my own experience with the collective unconscious in 1993, so that's now 30 years ago. Uh, and and so one of the issues is I just don't know what to do with it. And that's one of the reasons I make these videos. Okay, so here's the end of this section. He says, in his monumental Ion, Jung illustrates how the events of history reflect and are the results of transformations in the archetype of the self. It has been suggested, and rightly so, I believe, that this book is a scholarly elaboration of what Jung himself lived and suffered through in his long Red Book experience. There he played a role and actively took part in transformation of the gods. And his way of living and participating in that transformation shows how vital our human participation is. We are that limb that the gods cannot do without. If they, the gods, or the great secret unconscious archetypal determining factors of existence, go their own way, and if they insist in going down a different path, then we will continue to come face to face with the terrible world crises of possible planet destruction and wild mass immigration with neither the tools nor the spirit to deal with them and keep the human spirit alive. Woo. Okay. Sprinting to the end, one page left. The ethical challenge. The distinguishing trait of Jung's active imagination is the ethical responsibility we are called to embrace after encountering the figures of the unconscious. Marie-Louise von France once responded to a gleeful affirmation of mine about something I had suddenly become aware of with a sober, my condolences. Taken aback by her response, I naturally asked what she meant, and she simply replied that every new form of awareness and every act of becoming to of coming to consciousness is an additional responsibility the individual is called to bear. You are no longer free to behave in life as if you didn't know. Now you know. We know so many things about the plight of migrants and the unbearable situations they seek to escape from, just as we know so very much about climate change, that what causes it and what the predictable consequences of it will be. And yet humanity as a whole continues to deny or banish from consciousness the dire warnings that workers in refugee services and scientists and climatologists continue to repeat. A direct confrontation with the realities of the world of the unconscious could bring us face to face with the demons that block us and with the precious resources that could save us. The late John Dorley The late John Dorley wrote that Jung's psychology does not encourage us to rely on conscious strategies, but rather seeks to persuade humanity of the power of the unconscious, not only in matters personal, but also societal. Jung's approach calls us to the task of ushering the illimitable energies of the unconscious into the flow of historical consciousness. Jung tells us that all of his work had its roots in the experiences he lived between 1912 and 1916, and that he recorded so faithfully in the Red Book. There can be no doubt about the ethical seriousness with which he lived and registered those events. Failure on our part to do the same would reduce the sense of our engagement with the unconscious into a mere power game. We look at the world and we look into the unconscious, and the use we make of what we see and interact with is of immense importance. The stakes are high, and as Van Franz so succinctly put it, quote, now that we know, we can no longer live as if we didn't, unquote. Okay, and I would say that now that you've seen how powerful just talking about these things are in terms of just hypnotizing me, you can see how powerful this is. And now that you know, you know. And so, for those of you who've watched this entire essay as I've read it, you can understand that the ideas here are extremely powerful and hard to put your mind around. But these are the issues that are the spirits and so on that we must deal with in the 21st century. So Sherry says, German John Wolfgang von Goethe, Faust, The Sorrows of Young Werther, a play about a man who sells his soul to the devil. Poem Prometheus, the character of the mythic Prometheus, addresses God as Zeus in misotheist accusation and defiance. And so, if I read this correctly, what you're saying to me, Cherie, is that Goethe recognized the significance of these powers that were operating and are operating in my life right now as we see me, just going out during the reading. And so we have to understand these powers, these spirits, and how they can be controlled and used to help us find our way through. And so let's see. Okay, so the next essay in this book is called The Burning Urgency of Psychodynamic Discoveries in the Red Book for Psychiatry and Psychotherapy, a key for healing residents of soul, love, and life. Okay, sounds like another one that's going to knock my socks off. But that'll be for next week because I've just been obliterated psychologically. I need to get some rest, obviously. It's, I don't know if it's just the end of, the fall with the beginning of the Christmas vacation, or it's just me getting old, or uh, the intensity of the Frederick Douglass narrative, which is, I find it a bit more mild than I thought it would be, but it's certainly intense. And then the reading of this, maybe all those things have combined today in terms of knocking me out. And I apologize for that. Um, and so I'm going to excuse myself and say goodbye for this week. I'll see you next week. We will have, um, and everybody who is a Christian, have a Merry Christmas. If you're not a Christian, enjoy your holiday period, whatever it may be. And I'll look forward to seeing you one more time before we let 2025 go. And so, as for now, I'm going to sign off for today. And it's been a real object lesson to watch this, to see what happened to me today. But anyway, okay.